I missed you over the weekend. All right, so today we're going to be talking about Menes, also known as Narmer, also known as Scorpion King. And he lived around 350 BCE, maybe? It's a circa, so that's what that C means before. Circa means about. We don't have an exact date because, of course, Lexi hasn't let us have the keys to her time machine and go visit. You know, Shania hasn't gone and made the birth certificate for this guy. So we are guessing about when he was born. And he is going to be an important figure because, you see, originally Egypt was two kingdoms. You had a king in the north in Lower Egypt and a king in the south in Upper Egypt. Who remembers why Lower Egypt is in the north and Upper Egypt is in the south? Danny?
Because the Nile flows from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm. The Nile River flows north. Therefore, we have downriver is up north. It always confuses kiddos, but it's pretty easy once you understand it. Now, King Menes is going to be the first person to rule a united Egypt. And we think it was around circa 3100. And see, this is one of the things we have. One source says he lived 3050. This source says he ruled 31. So we don't know exactly when this was, but we do know it was over 5,000 years ago. Now, Menes can be confusing. We think Menes was the proper name, but sometimes you hear him called Narmer. Sometimes you hear him as Scorpion King. Sometimes you have a movie called The Mummy, and then they treat him as like a mythological monster figure in there as well. So, got lots of different names, but we think it's all referring to the same guy. And as the legends would have it, they say he was the first human to rule Egypt. So if he was the first human to rule Egypt, they say, what does their mythology say? Who ruled Egypt prior to him? Eliza's thinking perhaps kitty cats. I didn't even get a smile out of her. Ouch. So come on. If the legends say, and obviously I don't think these legends probably are not completely factual here, because, you know, it seems like humans have been around for a while. Who would have ruled Egypt if before humans? Evelyn?
The gods?
Yeah, they thought the gods ruled Egypt prior to this. So we had the gods ruling in lower, the gods ruling in upper, and they didn't get along. Then Narmer comes around, or Menes, or Scorpion King, whatever you want to call him, and is going to conquer. He unites Upper and Lower Egypt together. And it's really cool because we see hieroglyphics that are really, 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 really old in Upper Egypt. And guess what? They have the kings wore this crown, where it kind of looks like a bowling ball on their head. And we see really, really old hieroglyphics wearing this kind of crown, which kind of looks like a chair. And then after Narmer, we have the United Crown of Egypt. And he is going to be the first dynasty counted of the kings of Egypt. Now, a dynasty is going to basically be when you have a line of rulers. So we have Cortez. He is king. And when Cortez kicks the bucket, his son, Cortez II, becomes king. And then when Cortez II kicks the bucket, then Cortez III becomes king. Then Cortez IV and the fifth and the sixth. That's a dynasty, the Fletcher dynasty. And Egypt is going to have 30 different dynasties. I'm never, by the way, going to test you and say, how many dynasties did Egypt have? Because that doesn't really matter. What matters to know is what the idea of a dynasty is. And, you know, we know that Narmer is going to be the first. We're going to see a zoomed in, or not a zoomed in, but a zoomed out picture of this to see the pot so we can get a little bit more idea about Narmer in one moment. So, our takeaway from this slide, Egypt was originally two kingdoms, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Narmer unified them together, and this is symbolized by the double crown. Coolio, any questionroonies? All right. So let's take a look at this picture-rooney here. And of course, remember that this PowerPoint is already posted to your your Google, or not your Google, your Schoology page. These are the last two slides, basically, of that PowerPoint that we were working on last week. So here we see a zoomed-in picture here. What's happening in this picture? And this is the original, and then this is just like if we took out all of the gray and just saw what the picture is. So what's happening in this picture? Who has an idea? Who has an idea of what's happening in this picture? You can either give me a me in the chat or raise your hand. All right, Mr. Summers, start us off, sir.
It kind of looks like he's torturing the guy.
Torturing the guy? Okay. What do you think, Maddox?
I think he is I think he is controlling them, being controlative over them.
So who's Narmer in this picture, do you think? Riley, what do you think's going on? And before you two, tell me which one you think is Narmer or Menes.
I think there's like a sacrifice happening or something like that.
Okay. And which one do you think is Menes or Narmer?
The person with the crown.
Yeah, the person with the crown. Very good. You know that he's the king. And maybe he's sacrificing. We don't have a lot of evidence of Egyptian sacrifice, with the exception of the earliest. Well, actually, this would be the earliest of time, so perhaps, actually. Yeah, the big one, Alexander says. That's one of the ways we can know. Just like we saw with Gilgamesh, just like we saw with Hammurabi, and for when we saw with Sargon, they're always going to make the ruler taller than everybody else, bigger. Also, look, he's in the center. And we noticed he's got this cudgel or some sort of weapon. And it looks like he's probably going to really ruin this guy's day. Poor guy. Anything else we noticed going on in this picture? What do we think's going on here? What's the deal here? Do I not have many brave students? Like, I love Danny. He's amazing, but I can't have this be the Danny show. I'll have to start giving him part of my paycheck if he gives all the answers then. What do you think, Shania? You've got the kind of half hand. Be brave.
That the bird is probably like standing on a human.
Okay, bird saying it's something. It looks like a human head, but like to me that looks like a human peacock or something. What do you think, Zoe?
I think the bird might be like an eagle or a falcon or a hawk to represent power or something important that was happening.
All right. And last thing, Danny.
Looks like the bird has like a thing that's like prying open the dude's mouth or something.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. Like, part of me looks like he has like a ladle and he's like feeding this human peacock thing or something, or maybe he's prying it open. This probably represents the gods. Like down here, this is pretty obvious. Like we got like two dudes that I guess Narmer already ruined their day. This guy, maybe he's a priest or something. I don't know. But we can see that this, it makes sense. A mural of Narmer conquering Lower Egypt. And this is probably something like showing the gods like give approval of this. Over here we have these strange creatures. Like, are these like the former rulers like going and saying that this is what they want, united Egypt? I don't know. Okay, so now we're going to just do one. Well, we're going to look at basically a slide and a picture of our next chapter 5.2 as we're getting started on that. So don't worry, we're almost done. So here we just see Egypt during our old kingdom. Here we see this is happening at the same time as Sumer. So when we talk about Egypt, we're going to have 3 periods of Egyptian rule. And we've mentioned this a little bit. We have the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. And I bet you can guess which one is first. The Old Kingdom. Now, it can be a bit confusing, though, because all of this is really, really old. Now, we keep on using the word pharaoh, and it means great house. However, it's kind of one of those things that we do to make it easier to understand. The truth of the matter is that Egypt didn't really have their kings called pharaohs until the New Kingdom. However, everybody knows the term pharaoh. So for this class, and what you'll mostly see is everyone just calls all the Egyptian kings pharaohs, even though it's technically not true until the New Kingdom. Now, one thing that was true during the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms of Egypt is that these pharaohs had absolute power. Meaning, if the pharaoh said, Lexi, you need to go and do this, Lexi had to do it because the power of the pharaoh was so strong that they could just sentence her to death if not. I mean, we look at one of our examples that many of you are familiar with is in the book of Genesis when we have Joseph going and being in prison. The Pharaoh could free him if he wanted to immediately, which he eventually did, or he could just throw people in jail. You know, the Pharaoh had absolute power. And this kind of government is called an absolute monarchy. In 3rd and 4th grade, hopefully you discussed some absolute monarchs. Like think of King Louis the 16th, the Sun, or 14th, the Sun King. Let me double check which number he was. I always get confused. Sun King, King. Ah, the 14th. I was right the second time when I corrected myself. Yes. Now, one of these things is being an absolute monarchy. The Pharaoh owned everything. That cool necklace that Alexander has on, or whatever that is. Guess what? That's the Pharaoh's. Those sweet headphones Evelyn has. It's the Pharaoh's. That comfy couch Eliza's on. Pharaoh's. Those beautiful curtains. I really like those curtains. I should maybe think about getting those for my daughter's room because we need curtains. We just moved. And Shania's, guess what? Pharaoh's. That pencil you're writing with, Pharaoh's. That computer, Pharaoh's. Everything was the Pharaoh's. Now, when you have total power and rule everything and own everything, you need people to help you out. Because let's face it, the Pharaoh is going to be considered a living god. So not only are they a king, they're considered a god, they're considered the military general, all these things. You need people to do the work for you. Because if you are the king, you don't want to have to do everything yourself. You know, Pharaoh Kadir wants to enjoy being Pharaoh. He needs people fanning him with giant leaves and feeding him grapes and stuff like that. Therefore, he is going to have a large bureaucracy, which means he's going to have a big government under him to do his bidding. Now, the most highest ranking people are going to be called viziers or visors, but most people say viziers. Now, these are going to be the people going and working with the king or their advisors. So viziers, advisors, see how it kind of goes together? And once again, we see this example when we had Joseph, that story, how after he goes and interprets the Pharaoh's dreams, he winds up being made Grand Vizier of Egypt. And the Grand Vizier, he got to wear the Pharaoh's signet ring, meaning his words were the same as the Pharaoh's, and really, they ran the show. While, you know, Pharaoh Kadir, you know, like I said, he gets fanned by giant leaves and fed grapes and, you know, all that kind of good stuff. As a king should be treated, right? Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Pharaoh had 3 jobs, and it's going to be important for us to know these jobs. Obviously, they're the king, they're the political leader. Then they're the priests, they're in charge of religion. And finally, they are the general. They are in charge of military conquest. Now, different pharaohs are going to take different jobs more seriously. Some pharaohs, like Ramses II, is almost entirely going to focus on the military end. And we're going to see in the New Kingdom, he's going to conquer and have Egypt reach its greatest strength. Some pharaohs are going to take the job of priest most seriously. We're going to talk about a king who's actually going to make Egypt monotheistic. And then his son, King Tut, who's going to wind up reversing that. So you see they take the priest role more seriously. And finally, some pharaohs like Hatshepsut are going to take their political power most seriously. Hatshepsut's amazing because she's going to be the first female pharaoh, and she is going to wind up going and leading Egypt into a golden age of trade and architecture and cool stuff as she focused on being a ruler. Now, as we had talked about, the pharaohs was in charge of religion, and they were considered a god. So we have an interesting thing where we have Egypt being an absolute monarchy, but it's also something called a theocracy. Now, we've probably seen the word democracy or monarchy, that same kind of N where we have power. Theo represents gods. So what we have here is Egypt believed to be ruled by one of their gods. So we have a theocracy, rule by the gods. And that is going to be our notes for today. So we have a little bit of an idea of what Egyptian government was like, and we see how the first Egyptian government was formed with Narmer, or Menes, or Scorpion King, whatever you want to call him, unifying Upper and Lower Egypt. I hope you guys learned something, and I hope you enjoyed it. And now I'm going to end the recording. Are there any